The stars over the Orison expanse flickered like dying embers, their light dim and distant, as though the heavens themselves had begun to forget how to shine. It was said that once this region had been vibrant with trade routes, pilgrim fleets, and the laughter of countless human voices drifting across void lanes like distant hymns. Now there was only silence, deep, heavy, and wounded. The void held its breath as if mourning something ancient and irreplaceable. Before we begin, know this. We speak to you with genuine care. You are valued, you are welcome here, and we are grateful for you sharing this moment with us. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it there? Now let's get started. A funeral procession drifted across the command balcony of the bastion of Orison's crown, the largest fortress system in this forgotten frontier. Hundreds of warriors, pilgrims, and officials stood in solemn ranks, their armor and robes catching the pale starlight. At the center, a great sarcophagus, once carrying the relics of Saint Proxima Merinth, now held only dust and silence. The world that had once honored her, Varax Delta Prime, no longer existed. It had not burned. It had not fallen to plague nor heresy. It had simply faded. All psychic resonance, all thought, all life, all memory, drained away into the void, leaving a hollow sphere of barren rock with cities still intact, machines still functioning, and not a single breathing soul. No struggle, no sign of resistance, just absence. Lord Celestarch Morval Astrion stood above the assembled mourners, his armor dark as the night sky, trimmed with the pale bone white of remembrance. He was a man carved from resolve. Tall, severe in bearing, every motion measured as though sculpted by the Emperor's will. Yet his eyes, a cold storm grey, held something fragile and unspoken. He had once believed he understood the nature of war, of sacrifice, of faith. But Varax Delta Prime had offered no answers, only questions he feared to name. He had seen battlefields turn to ash. He had watched brothers fall. He had seen the sky burn under the mark of demonic suns. But nothing had prepared him for a world losing its meaning itself. The liturgical hymns rose in a slow, sorrowful swell, voices trembling, as though afraid their sound might also be stolen away by the same unseen hunger. The choir mistress, Seraphine Vale, stood at the forefront, her voice gentle yet resonant, weaving the funeral hymn into something that felt like a prayer for the entire sector. She was a woman of deep reverence, devotion shaped into poise and grace. Yet even she trembled, not from grief, but from understanding. She had felt what had taken that world. Not a tyrannid synapse scream, not warp corruption, not a psychic storm. A hunger, slow, cold, deliberate. A hunger that did not feed on flesh, but on the spark within the soul. The whisper of the sad warp that made humanity human. As the last notes of her hymn faded into the vaulted air, silence returned like a closing tomb. Morval stepped forward to speak, his voice steady but heavy. Let this world be remembered, not for how it died, but for how it lived. It was home to countless hearts, believers, dreamers, laborers, scholars, all bound by the light of the Emperor. Though their voices are gone, we will not allow their memory to fade into nothing. As long as one of us remembers, they are not lost. His words were dignified, they always were. But those who watched closely saw the tension in his jaw, the slight tremor in the breath he drew afterward. He was not used to speaking for the dead who left no trace of themselves behind. Seraphine's eyes met his. She knew the truth he did not voice. He feared that this was not an ending, but a beginning. The void outside flickered. The stars dimmed again, as though something vast had turned its attention toward them. Morval dismissed the assembly, though many lingered, whispering prayers with quiet desperation. He walked alone toward the grand balcony overlooking the star lanes, where the expanse stretched infinite and empty. The silence here was heavier, as though something pressed upon him from beyond physical form. What are you? He wondered. He had studied Tyranid hive fleets before. He knew their horrors. Worlds devoured in biomass harvests, skies shadowed by gargantuan bioforms, planetary surfaces scraped clean of all cellular life. But this was not that. This was worse. This devoured identity. A faint chime sounded, a signal from deep space Vox relays. Morval turned, expecting a routine report. It was a distress broadcast. The voice was broken, barely audible, fragmented by interference that did not resemble static so much as breathing. This is hallowed world of Erendor's mercy. Our psychers, they cannot hear each other anymore. The choir fell silent. Emperor, preserve us. Something is watching us. They don't want our bodies. They hunger for... The transmission cut with a sound like a whisper exhaling. Morval's breath stilled. A second transmission followed, shorter, raw, more desperate. They eat the soul. Silence followed. Cold, merciless silence. Seraphine appeared beside him, having heard it too. No expression. Only quiet, resigned dread. He did not speak for a long time. The void outside seemed to pulse, faint, rhythmic, as though something enormous drifted just beyond visible space. Morval had always believed that faith would be his anchor, that through faith all horrors could be endured. Yet now, at this brink, he faced a truth he had never allowed himself to consider. Faith was not only a strength, it was a vulnerability. What is a prayer to something that eats prayers? But he could not show fear. Not here. Not now. Prepare the fleet, he said quietly. Seraphine's voice trembled. Morval, what if this is beyond us? He turned to her, and in his expression, there was no certainty. Only resolve. The kind born from the refusal to surrender to despair. If we do nothing, then humanity becomes a corpse that remembers it once lived. We cannot allow that. We hold the line. We must. She did not argue. She bowed her head, not in obedience, but in understanding. The first move had been made. The galaxy had shifted. Far beyond human sight, something ancient stirred. A presence woven of hunger, memory, and silence. It listened, it learned, it waited. And somewhere in the deep void, a shadow crawled across the stars. A hive fleet, unlike any recorded, its tendril minds whispering in a chorus of stolen voices. We remember you. We will taste you. We are Erebus. The morning sky dimmed further, as though night had begun to gather not just around the fortress, but around the soul of the galaxy itself. The bastion of Orison's crown remained shrouded in a heavy quiet that lingered long after the funeral rites had dispersed. Yet beneath that silence, activity surged like a current under ice. Servitors clanged through illuminated corridors. Astartes' honor guards maintained their solemn vigil. Strategium halls flickered with tactical projections, each marked by red worlds blinking like dying hearts. Morval walked through it all with his cloak trailing behind him, striding with purpose, but his thoughts were no longer certain. The message from Erendor's mercy had burned into him, leaving a mark deeper than grief. There was something fundamentally different about this threat, something that refused to be defined by the known lexicons of war. He did not go to the Strategium first. He went to the choir. The halls of resonance were vast enough to hold a cathedral within them, yet still felt small when considering the immensity of what they touched. The far walls shimmered with auric sigils designed to stabilize psychona presence and shield against warp reverberations. The air itself felt charged with memory, as if thousands of prayers had once filled it daily like incense, now reduced to only flickers and faint echoes. The choir mistress Seraphine waited at the threshold, her posture poised as always, but her eyes marked by something unguarded and weary. "They are ready," she said softly. He nodded, though part of him wished he could delay. Yet time had become a luxury since the dying worlds began. They stepped inside together. The imperial choir stood upon a circular dais, arranged in a formation of concentric rings. There were 47 psychers present, each trained to withstand the psychic tides of stellar communication. Some young and trembling, others old and pale. Each wore expressions of titan focus. Their leader, Hivox Adept Kalhan, bowed upon Morval's arrival, but his motion was stiff, as though sleep had not come to him for days. "We will attempt psychic resonance tracing to recover what we can from the last transmission," Kalhan said. His voice was uneven. "But we must warn you, there is something in the residual echo, something that listens back." Morval did not flinch, though the words cut cold. "Proceed. We cannot protect the Imperium with half-truths." The choir began. A low hum emerged first, rising from the psychers' throats like a chant born in ancient temples. Their breathing synchronized, their minds aligning through trained ritual. A soft, shimmering light formed around them. Warp energy cooled into shape through discipline and prayer. Seraphine's hands tightened on her staff. She felt the warp's shifting texture, its tension, like breath held behind a closed door. Then the tone broke. A sudden sharp sound, like crystal fracturing under pressure, cut through the hall. One of the younger psychers reeled, choking back a gasp. Others wavered, eyes flickering. Seraphine stepped forward, lending her presence, a calming, stabilizing current that steadied the formation. But the warp did not calm. Something was waiting. It entered not with force, but absence. The void slid across their minds like a gloved hand, stripping away warmth. The hum collapsed into whispers, and those whispers became a silence so absolute it felt as if sound had been swallowed. Then the screaming began, not aloud, not with voices. The psychers convulsed. Their mouths opened in silent agony. The warp around them shuddered, warping the air as if reality strained to hold itself together. Morval felt his hand move toward his sword by instinct, though there was nothing to strike. Seraphine's eyes widened, not in fear of what she saw, but of what she felt. It was hunger, patient, vast, aware. "Where are your souls?" A voice that was not a voice breathed inside their minds. "We tasted one world. We remember the shape of it, the sweetness of thought, the warmth of identity. We are learning you. We are refining our appetite." Seraphine cried out and dropped to her knees. Kalhan's nose bled. 2 psychers collapsed entirely, their life force flickering like candles blown out. Morval moved to Seraphine, grasping her shoulder, grounding her with touch alone. "Break connection," she gasped. Kalhan tried, but the choir was no longer controlling the link. The link was being held from the other side. The presence pressed deeper, not invading, studying. "We are Erebus. We remember the memory of your prayers. We follow the warmth of your hope. We feed on the space between your thoughts. We will taste all that you are." Then, just as suddenly, it released them. Silence fell, crushing, absolute. One by one, the psychers collapsed. Some unconscious, some breathing shallow, some gone entirely. Minds hollowed from within. leaving only living bodies devoid of presence. Their eyes stared, open, but no longer seeing. Morval felt the weight of the moment like a blade pressed to the back of his throat. This was not a hive mind that consumed matter. This was something that understood meaning. Seraphine's breath trembled as she tried to rise. Morval steadied her again. They did not just lose connection, she whispered. They lost themselves. Whatever this is, it feeds on what binds humanity to the warp, to each other, to faith. Morval looked over the fallen psychers. Their faces were peaceful, too peaceful, as though they did not remember fear. This is a war against the soul, he said. Seraphine met his gaze, and there was sorrow there, sorrow and something deeper, a quiet terror that did not yet have words. We cannot meet this with strategy alone, she whispered. No, Morval replied, but we will meet it. He helped her stand, and for a moment, their closeness felt like the only warmth left in the hall. Not intimacy, not confession, something simpler, something human, a reminder that they were still themselves. Then a new sound rose through the fortress, alarm sirens winding like iron throats opening to scream. Morval did not need a report to know. Erebus had arrived. Its shadow had crossed system scan range. The war for the soul of the frontier had begun. The alarms did not scream with urgency, nor did they signal chaos or confusion. Instead, they rose in a slow, pulsing tone, like a heartbeat echoing through metal corridors. It was not a cry of panic, but a warning that something vast had crossed the threshold of the system. The bastion's lights dimmed slightly, adjusting power distribution to defense protocols, and the great adamantine shields of Orison's crown shifted into place like the plates of a titan preparing to endure a storm. Morval and Seraphine moved with steady purpose, though their steps were swift. The psychic collapse of the choir still hung like frost along the edges of Morval's thoughts, something cold and clinging. But he did not allow himself to slow or hesitate. Whatever had touched them, whatever had spoken, it was here now. And hesitation was the first mercy it would devour. They reached the Grand Strategium, where the entirety of Orison's command structure converged. A vast circular chamber, its central hololith projecting the starfield around the fortress in luminous, shifting blue. Officers, tacticians, and servitors moved with controlled efficiency, each one aware that protocol now demanded precision above all else. The air vibrated with silent tension. "Report," Morval commanded. A lieutenant stepped forward, his voice steady but thin, like someone forcing himself not to imagine the worst. "Lord Kellerstark, long-range augurs confirm the presence of extraterrestrial bioforms of Tyranid signature pattern. Classification uncertain. Fleet morphology does not match Leviathan, Behemoth, Kraken, or any recorded substrain. Estimated primary mass displacement suggests a Hive Fleet scale incursion." Morval watched the hololith as shapes emerged, vast silhouettes moving through the void, more like drifting cathedral ships than the standard chitinous shapes of most Hive Fleets. They were immense, elongated, and heavy with layered ridges, like the rib cages of ancient titans fossilized into motion. Their movements were slow, graceful even, like a predator that already knew its prey had nowhere to run. Another officer, her voice brittle, added, "Their void wake does not disrupt the warp in the standard manner. It seems muted, absorption rather than suppression." Seraphine felt the meaning of that before Morval voiced it. "It is feeding even now," she whispered, drawing from the psychic current of the system. "The closer it comes, the quieter everything feels." Morval remembered the choir. Voices falling silent, minds hollowing out. No screams, no violence, just absence. "Contact Admiral Halbrecht," Morval said. "Bring the defense fleet to formation Oriat Vigil. Maintain long-range bombardment distance. Do not engage in close pursuit. We meet them on our terms." The orders rippled outward at once. If they could prevent direct synapse contact, they might stand a chance. But as the hololith magnified one of the approaching vessels, the chamber grew still. It was shaped like the husk of a great whale, though no natural creature could ever have possessed such scale. Its hide shimmered not with carapace plating, but with something almost organic glass-like, like the hardened remains of candles melted together over centuries. Along its length, faint symbols pulsed, patterns like psalm verses carved in bone, and from its prow hung thousands of thin, filament-like tendrils, drifting behind it like the tattered remnants of a once grand banner. It was beautiful, horrifying, old. Seraphine's breath caught. "I've seen this in dreams." Morval turned to her. "The dreams began before Varax Delta fell," she said, voice low. "I didn't understand their meaning then. I thought they were echoes of warp turbulence. But it was this. It was coming long before we recognized the signs." He studied her expression. Not fear, but recognition, as though a memory in her mind had awoken. "What did you dream?" he asked. She hesitated for only a moment. A fleet that sails the void seeking warmth, not of the body, but of thought, of purpose, a hunger for identity, as though the hive mind has evolved or remembered something it once was. A technician's voice cut in, sharp and too loud in the silence. "We are receiving psychic interference, not suppression, communication." Morval's jaw tightened. He knew better than to allow that signal into minds. Yet Seraphine was already reaching out, her hand raised. "I can contain the projection," she said. "Let it come. If we deny ourselves understanding, we blind ourselves." He did not like it, but the war was no longer simply material. Limit the transmission, contain within the choir mistress alone. She nodded, closed her eyes, and opened her mind. The chamber fell away in her perception. The light, the hololith, the hum of machinery, all dissolved into a vast, endless ocean of cold dark. There was depth to this void, but no sound, no motion, not even the whisper of her own thoughts. Then came breath, slow, gentle, as though something immense rested just beyond sight. A voice formed not in words but in impressions, in the faint shape of longing. We remember warmth. Seraphine flinched, but did not break connection. We remember the taste of meaning, of thought, of dreaming. We lost it once. You carry it still. We seek to become whole again. The thought was intimate, close, almost tender, like the murmur of a memory, but beneath it, hunger, deep and endless. Morval's voice anchored her, distant yet steady. "Seraphine, break contact," she tried. The presence did not allow her to. "You fear us," it observed, "but there is no need. We do not destroy. We take only what makes you more than flesh. We free you from suffering, from longing, from self." Her pulse quickened. "No," she whispered aloud, breath shaking. "That is death. That is emptiness." "No." The thought curved around her like a hand closing. "It is peace." Morval stepped forward, his voice sharp as a blade. "Seraphine, now!" She slammed mental barriers into place, tearing herself free. The severance hit like falling from great height. She staggered. Morval caught her before she collapsed. Her chest heaved, breath unsteady. For a long moment, neither spoke. The Hive Fleet did not accelerate, did not fire, did not roar. It simply drifted closer, as though confident that fear and silence would do its work for it. Morval looked at the hololith, the slow approach of something that did not need to hurry, something that believed victory was inevitable. "Prepare the fleet," he said. His voice was calm, controlled. "War protocols theta through omega. We hold the expanse. No retreat, no fracture. If Erebus wishes to unmake us, it must come and tear meaning from our hands." Officers bowed and moved to enact his command, but Seraphine, still leaning against him, whispered something that chilled him deeper than the void itself. "It doesn't fear us, Morval. It pities us." Far beyond the fortress walls, the first shadow of Hive Fleet Erebus crossed the starlight, darkening the heavens like the closing of a great lid over the world. The shadow of Hive Fleet Erebus lingered at the edge of system range, neither attacking nor retreating, as though it were studying the very concept of resistance. Morval watched its slow movement through the hololithic projection, the drifting cathedral-like shapes gliding forward as though carried on unseen tides. The fleet's silence was more unnerving than any roar of biocannon fire. It was the silence of inevitability, of something that believed time itself favored its hunger. Morval's armor felt heavier than usual as he left the strategium. His steps echoed in the cathedral metal corridors of Orison's crown, the fortress walls decorated with triumphs of ancient wars, banners worn by time, fragments of broken demon blades sealed behind purity seals, memorial plaques etched with names of heroes whose sacrifice was honored by history. Yet now, those reminders of glory felt like echoes of a different age, one where war had clear shape and purpose. This enemy offered neither. He made his way to the tactical council chamber, where Admiral Halbrecht, senior captains, planetary governors, and regiment commanders had gathered. The air was tense, sharply lit, every breath measured. They rose in respect when Morval entered. He motioned for them to sit. Halbrecht spoke first. "Our long-range batteries are charged. Flak and Void interceptors stand ready. If Erebus advances, we can force a defensive attrition engagement." Morval shook his head. "We cannot assume this enemy responds to attrition. Every known Tyranid doctrine suggests adaptive escalation. If we reveal our strength too early, Erebus will learn how to unmake us." A silence followed. Strategy, real strategy, required sacrifice, and there was a limit to what the defenders could afford to lose. General Acastian Vor, tall and broad-shouldered with a hard-set expression, leaned forward. "Then we withdraw to the inner worlds," he said. "Call the fleet inward, seal the warp routes, contain the threat until reinforcement arrives. We cannot defend this entire frontier alone." There it was, the first fracture. Morval regarded him steadily. If we abandon the frontier, the expanse becomes a corridor for Erebus to advance unopposed. Every world behind us becomes prey. The Imperium cannot afford to surrender ground to a predator that feeds on meaning, not land, not time, not memory. Vor's jaw clenched. "You speak of ideals while we face extinction." "I speak of consequences," Morval answered, voice quiet and resolute. "If we retreat, we teach the galaxy that humanity yields, and Erebus learns that the soul of mankind can be devoured without struggle." Vor rose to his feet. "You would doom millions for symbolism." Morval stood too. The air between them tightened. Threads of history stretched thin. They had fought in wars side by side, bled for the same banners, honored the same fallen. Once, Vor had called Morval brother in war. "We hold," Morval said. "Here, now, because if we do not, There will be no line left to hold. Vor's voice was ice. My duty is to preserve life, not burn it in service to your faith. And mine is to preserve humanity itself, Morval replied, not merely the bodies that carry it. The chamber remained still, silence suffocating, each watching the fracture widen. Seraphine, who had been silent until now, spoke softly, but her words carried weight. Erebus does not merely seek to kill. It unravels the essence that makes humanity capable of love, memory, identity. If we retreat, every world behind us will die quietly, without resisting, without even remembering that they once lived. Those who survive will not grieve. They will not be capable of it. Is that the future you are willing to defend? Vor did not look at her. His eyes remained locked with Morval's, hard and clouded by conviction. No one has seen this fleet before, Vor said. No records, no weaknesses. You want us to fight a myth with belief alone. His voice dropped. Belief does not stop a devouring tide. Belief is what separates us from being devoured, Morval answered. Vor's lips curled, not in anger, but sadness. Then we are already lost. He turned, and the room felt colder for it. Morval did not call after him. There was no use in forcing loyalty from the unwilling. Some fractures, once made, could not be repaired. They could only be navigated. Vor stopped at the door and looked back once, his expression unreadable. When the reckoning comes, I pray that your faith is enough to justify the cost. Then he was gone. Seraphine exhaled, quiet, her shoulders weighted. He will not return. No, Morval said. He will gather what forces will follow him, and they will run. Halbrecht shifted uncomfortably. We lose a third of our defensive force if he withdraws. Morval nodded. Then we fight with what remains. The room did not argue. There was no point. Morval dismissed the council, though he knew rest would not find any of them. He walked alone to the observation deck, Seraphine remaining a step behind, not speaking, simply present. The viewport stretched across the black like a great wound in reality, showing stars dimmed beneath Erebus's approaching silhouette. The fleet pulsed, not in light, but intent, a slow, rhythmic contraction of psychic gravity, like the breathing of a sleeping giant that dreamed of hunger. Seraphine's voice finally broke the quiet. You knew he would leave. Yes. Does it wound you? It should, Morval said. But the choir's collapse, the silence left in their eyes. That wounds more. There are things worse than betrayal. Seraphine stepped closer, not close enough to touch, but enough to be felt. You do not have to carry this alone. His voice was barely above a whisper. If I am wrong, the galaxy forgets itself. If I am right, the price may be everything we are. She did not answer. Some truths were not for answering. Outside, the Hive Fleet drifted nearer, still silent, still unhurried, a predator without uncertainty. But its movement changed, subtle but unmistakable. It was not merely approaching. It was forming around the system, encircling, sealing, a tightening noose. Halbrecht's voice crackled through the Vox link. Lord Kellerstark, the fleet is maneuvering to surround us. We are being herded. Erebus was not advancing to attack. It was preparing to feed. Morval felt the decision settle within him, not a choice, but a necessity sculpted by inevitability. Signal the fleet, he said. Prepare for engagement pattern Vesper's Gate. We strike first. Seraphine's breath caught. We move toward it. Yes. His eyes did not waver. A predator learns by consuming. If we allow it to study us, there will be nothing left to save. And for the first time since the choir fell, Seraphine saw not only resolve in him, but sorrow, not despair. Sorrow for the cost he had already accepted. Far beyond, the stars dimmed further, as though the galaxy itself were drawing in one final breath before the storm. Preparations for the engagement began at once. The Bastion's fleets moved with the mechanical precision of crews trained through decades of discipline. Yet there was something subdued in every motion, an awareness that this was not merely another war. Servitor cherubs drifted past Gothic archways bearing prayer scrolls that fluttered like faded wings. Vox orders echoed off cathedral metal walls. The great engines of void ships ignited with slow, thunderous resonance. But beneath all of this, there was a stillness like waiting for the first breath after a long drowning. Morval stood upon the command balcony of the warship Sanctis Veritas as it broke from Orison's crown and took its place at the spearhead of the formation. The vessel was an ancient crusade carrier, older than records dared to name, its hull adorned in reliefs depicting victories long reduced to myth. Its stained-glass viewports cast fractured colours across Morval's armour, holy blue, deep red, and the muted gold of devotion. Seraphine stood beside him, her presence quiet, not as a subordinate nor as an equal, but as someone who shared the same horizon now. The choir's psychic collapse had thinned her, leaving exhaustion beneath her steady expression. Yet she didn't ask for rest. She watched the void ahead with the cautious gaze of one who had seen something look back. As the fleet advanced, the void began to shift. Space itself seemed to warp in subtle, unsettling ways, not in the flash ripples of warp travel or the gravitational distortions of massive bodies, but as though reality were being thinned from the edges inward. The starlight dimmed to an ashen pallor. Sounds seemed to dull, even inside sealed helmets. The fleet's engines hummed, but that hum felt distant, like sound remembered rather than heard. It was Seraphine who first sensed it, though she did not speak of her fear until the scanners confirmed the shapes ahead. Refugee ships, hundreds. They drifted without formation, without beacon, without life support signals. They floated as though abandoned mid-journey, their hulls intact, their engines inactive. Some were pilgrim vessels, their once bright icons of devotion now dimmed. Others were merchant convoys, bulk carriers, mining ships, local transports, all silent. Morval's hand tightened on the railing. "Do we detect survivors?" The Vox officer hesitated. "There are life signs, my lord, but they are faint, inconsistent. It is as though the life remains only because the body has not realized it should be dead," Seraphine finished softly. Morval turned toward her. Her voice did not tremble, but her hands were clenched white around the haft of her staff. He gave the order. "Dispatch boarding and medical teams. Secure survivors. Bring them aboard under quarantine." Even as he spoke, he knew the horror they were about to witness. But leaving the survivors adrift was not an option, not while there was still something left to save. The first recovered vessel was a small pilgrim craft, once painted in joyous golds and whites. Now its interior was silent, its candles burned down to wax nubs, its icons smeared with something like dust. The boards reported back with voices controlled only by training. "My lord, we have found them." There were hundreds of them, sitting, standing, kneeling, all perfectly still, eyes open, breathing slow and shallow, not asleep, not frozen in terror, just vacant. When spoken to, they did not respond. When touched, they did not resist. Their hearts beat, their lungs drew breath, their eyes followed movement, but there was no recognition, no reaction, no grief for the lost, no relief at rescue, no memory of being human. Morval stood in the Sanctis Veritas medical ward as the first survivors were brought in. Clerics and medici servitors examined them with a frantic desperation to find something wrong. Chemical imbalance, neurological trauma, warp sickness, something that could be healed. But the survivors were whole, physically untouched. A medicae looked up at Morval, confusion fracturing his professional calm. "Their minds are not damaged," he said. "They are simply empty. The regions that govern emotional identity are present, but inactive. The patterns are there, but there is no spark." Seraphine stepped closer to one of the survivors, a woman, perhaps mid-age, once a pilgrim, judging by her robes. The woman's eyes followed her slowly, but without curiosity, recognition, or fear. Seraphine lifted her hand, hovering it just above the woman's brow, sensing for psychic presence. There was none, not suppression, absence. Seraphine's breath left her in a quiet gasp. "It took everything in her that could feel connection," she said, voice weighted like a funeral bell. "Her love, her memories, her faith, all the things that make a person aware that they exist." Morval looked into the woman's eyes and saw no one looking back. Not a prisoner, not a victim, not even a soul lost to madness. Only a living remnant of someone who once lived and remembered loving something. He turned away. "Seal the medical ward," he said. "No one enters without clearance, not until we understand the full extent." The situation should have sparked panic, but instead, the ship's corridors and decks remained tense in a restrained, suffocating way. Soldiers whispered prayers not for victory, but for remembrance, afraid that someday they too would forget the words. Hours into the operation, another report arrived. More survivors had been recovered from additional refugee ships, children. But the children were different. Unlike the adults, their faces did not remain blank. They cried, but without sobbing, tears falling without expression. They clung to food and warmth, but mechanically, as though remembering instinct rather than desire. Some held toys tightly, hands trembling, but their eyes showed no comfort in the holding. One small boy looked directly at Seraphine when she approached him. His face was streaked with dry tears. His breath shook as though fear moved through him, but without shape or source. She knelt in front of him, slow and patient. "What is your name?" she asked gently. The boy opened his mouth, but no sound came. He blinked, and his entire body shuddered. Then very quietly, he whispered. "They took the warm parts." Seraphine's blood ran cold. "Who took them?" The boy stared at her, not with recognition, but because her voice had drawn his focus. "The voices in the dark," he whispered. "They said we didn't need to hurt anymore. They said we could be quiet." Seraphine felt something inside her fracture. Not physically, not psychically. Something deeper. An understanding of what was being stolen. The ability to care, to love, to mourn, to be human. Morval watched from a short distance, his expression unreadable. He had seen planets burn. He had seen the warp spill horrors into the world. But he had never seen humanity erased without violence. One of the officers approached him quietly. "My lord, General Vor's fleet is withdrawing. They have broken formation. They are sealing the warp lanes behind them." The betrayal was expected, yet it still cut. Morval did not look away from the child as he answered. "May the Emperor forgive him," he said, "because I cannot." Vor was gone. The frontier was alone. Seraphine rose slowly, her voice soft when she spoke to Morval. "We cannot save these people." "No," he replied, "but we can prevent the galaxy from sharing their fate." Below them, The Hive Fleet continued to encircle the system, silent as the breath before prayer. The war no longer threatened life. It threatened what makes life worth living. The fleet advanced toward Erebus in disciplined formation, engines burning slow and deliberate to maintain cohesion. The void felt muted around them, as though sound and thought were being damped beneath an unseen pressure. It was not silence born of distance, but of something actively listening, assessing, and softly taking. Even the ship spirits of the Sanctis Veritas hummed differently, their machine psalms subdued, their lumen panels flickering as though distracted by a presence beyond mechanical comprehension. Morval stood at the viewport, hands clasped behind his back. He watched the drifting silhouettes of the hive ship swell larger with every passing moment. Their size defied proportion. Leviathans built not from logic or engineering, but from a grotesque elegance of living bone and membrane stretched across cathedral curves. They moved with a slow certainty, gliding through space as if guided by instinct older than stars themselves. The fleet's voxnet crackled softly with status updates. No fear in the voices, not yet, only contained discipline. But beneath the practiced tone, every voice held the same quiet question. What happens when we fire and the void does not answer back? Seraphine stood beside him, now wrapped in a cloak of alabaster cloth, meant to steady her psychic presence, though it could not conceal the pallor that clung to her skin. She had slept for perhaps an hour since the choir's collapse. Not true sleep, but the shallow drifting of a mind guarding itself even in rest. The memory of the choir's eyes, open, empty, living, followed her like a shadow. She spoke without looking away from the void. It will not attack first. It wants to see how we resist. It wants to learn the shape of our fear before it consumes the shape of our souls. Morval did not respond immediately. He understood. He had understood since the survivors were brought aboard. Erebus did not devour life to survive. It devoured identity to become. A Vox officer's voice cut through the chamber. Primary bioforms approaching engagement radius, awaiting authorization. Morval lifted one hand slowly, the gesture steady as ritual. Fire when ready. The Sanctis Veritas shuddered as macro cannon batteries discharged, their shells streaking across the void like falling stars. Lance beams followed, pure burning spears of condensed solar fire. Other ships joined the volley, forming a wave of devastation that would have shattered an asteroid belt or gutted a lesser hive fleet. The shot struck Erebus, but there was no explosion, no flash of splintered carapace, no roar of void rupture. Instead, the surface of the leading hive ship rippled. The way a muscle tightens to absorb impact, the shells vanished into its mass as though swallowed. The lance fire refracted, spreading like light through liquid glass, dispersing into glittering fragments before fading into nothing. The strategium fell silent. Adjust firing trajectory, Halbrecht ordered sharply. Focus on structural joints. Increase beam intensity. Prepare melter torpedo volley. The fleet complied. Another barrage followed, more focused, more fierce. This time, the hull reacted differently. It contracted, not in defense, but in acknowledgement, as if noting the attempt. A low, resonant signal pulsed from Erebus. Not sound, not psychic scream. Something deeper. Something that moved through the ships like a pressure change in the soul. Many staggered, gripping railings, gasping as though something had momentarily stolen the air from their lungs. Morval's vision blurred at the edges. Seraphine's hand flew to her chest, breath sharp. The signal conveyed one idea. We are learning you. Morval steadied himself, voice cold steel. Close to mid-range bombardment distance. Maintain spacing. No vessel is to engage in close contact. Prepare interceptor screens to disrupt boarding spores. Halbrecht's reply was crisp. Acknowledged. Yet even as he spoke, the void outside shifted. The Hive Fleet moved, not with rush, but with purpose. Bioships adjusted orientation, their tendrils unfurling like the limbs of deep-sea leviathans sensing prey. Smaller organisms detached, shapes like winged silhouettes of bone and tendon, moving in sweeping formations. They glowed faintly, as though lit from within by stolen starlight. Spore swarms approaching, a sensor officer warned. Her voice remained even, but her eyes widened with something close to awe. But their movement is patterned, coordinated with our fleet vector shifts. They are predicting our formation adjustments before we make them. Seraphine closed her eyes, focusing. The psychic field trembled like stretched choral strings. The Hive intelligence is not separate from the void, she whispered. It is not reaching through the warp. It is moving through memory. It is reading the imprint of every act we have ever taken. Morval's voice became colder. How? She opened her eyes. There was grief in them. Because it has devoured worlds that prayed, worlds that hoped, worlds that feared. It has feasted on what we are, and from those remnants, it is building understanding. The first wave of spores hit the interceptor screens, but instead of detonating or dispersing into biological shrapnel, they lingered, clinging to the shield barriers like frost forming on glass. The interference fields of the Sanctis Veritas flickered, as though something were tasting their frequency. Shields dropping 3%, a tech priest intoned. Recalibrating. The interference persists. It is analyzing the energy signature. The Hive Fleet was not attacking. It was studying. Morval felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear, but recognition of the shape of the enemy. Halbrecht, he said, voice low. This fleet does not seek to crush us. It seeks to understand how to do so with the smallest effort. If it learns our defenses fully, it will never need to fire a single weapon, Halbrecht finished. Seraphine turned toward Morval. Her voice trembled, not from weakness, but from the terrible clarity of truth. We must attack from within the warp. We must call upon the choir again. No, Morval said at once. They are the only force capable of countering psychic assimilation. And the choir is broken. We would be asking them to die, to be hollowed, to become what the refugees became, Seraphine finished for him. I know. She stepped closer, her expression steady, though her voice was raw. But if we do nothing, entire worlds will become like them. Planets full of breathing bodies with no names, no grief, no love, no memory of being human. Morval felt a slow ache spread through him, a weight born not of doubt, but inevitability. He had sworn to protect humanity, not simply its lives, its soul. He exhaled, the sound weary and heavy, as though carved from years instead of moments. Summon what remains of the choir. Prepare the psionic resonance chamber. We will attempt a focused counterpulse. Seraphine bowed her head, not in obedience, but in mourning. Morval turned back to the void, watching the Hive Fleet move like a dream remembered through water. Erebus pulsed again, soft, patient, like the slow tightening of arms around something fragile, as if it were already holding the frontier in its embrace, as if the war had already been decided, and the fleet was only learning the shape of how the end would feel. The stars around them dimmed further, their light fading, as though memory itself were thinning. And for the first time since the war began, Morval wondered if the galaxy was beginning to forget its own name. The Sanctis Veritas drifted in slow, measured formation, its engines humming with the steady thrum of void stabilizers compensating for the silent psychic pressure radiating from Erebus. The hymnal choir chamber, once a place of exalted communion with the Astronomicon, was now a warded sanctuary of dim candlelight and incense-thick air. The psychers who remained were few. Less than half the choir still lived, and many of those who survived seemed as fragile as glass left in winter frost. Their eyes were clouded with strain, their breaths shallow. They were not ready. They would never be ready. But time no longer permitted readiness. Seraphine walked among them with a presence both gentle and absolute. She touched shoulders, offered quiet words, not of reassurance. There were no comforting lies left to speak, but simple acknowledgement, the kind that affirmed they were still themselves. She knew that mattered now more than courage. Morval observed in silence from the upper gallery, hands resting lightly on the rail. He did not let himself look too closely at the choir members' faces, for the memory of their collapse was still too vivid. He could see Seraphine's posture shift subtly as she steadied them, her exhaustion hidden beneath determined grace. She had become the pillar that held them all, even as her own spirit strained under the weight of being touched by the vast quiet of Erebus. Below, the choir formed their resonance circle. Their voices rose, soft at first, trembling like struck crystal, then steadied into a slow chant that rippled outward through the chamber. The tone vibrated the metal of the ship, humming along its sanctified bones. The candles guttered, the air thickened, and the warp, once distant, stirred like a creature turning in uneasy sleep. Morval closed his eyes. He prayed not for victory. He prayed to be remembered, even if no one survived to remember him. The chamber atmosphere shifted sharply, and Seraphine's voice joined the choir, not as command, but as anchor. She was not calling power. She was shaping the silence around it, giving form to what would otherwise overwhelm them. The psychic field expanded outward. It touched the void. It touched Erebus. Seraphine gasped, her body tensing as if something pressed against her from every direction. Morval moved instantly, descending the steps, but she raised a hand without looking, refusing interruption, refusing protection. The presence of the Hive Fleet flowed into her mind. This time, it did not speak as hunger. It spoke as memory. She saw a world, not human, bathed in pale light. Creatures moved there, graceful and luminous, defined by thought and unity rather than form. They were not predators. They were singers, their minds intertwined in harmonic resonance. There was no loneliness there, no pain, only connection. Until something came. A rift in the fabric of existence, a wound of chaos, a great devouring howl that shattered their harmony. In the aftermath, those beings had clawed desperately to survive, to rebuild identity, and in their terror, they took from others to restore what was lost. Erebus remembered love, but it remembered it as a wound. Seraphine's voice broke into a whisper. They were not born as devourers. They became this. Morval's pulse tightened. Seraphine, break contact. She did not respond. The choir trembled. One member collapsed, foam on their lips. Another screamed without sound, clutching their skull. A third simply went still, still breathing, still warm, empty. Morval stepped forward, catching Seraphine as her knees buckled. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated, tears streaking down her face not from fear, but heartbreak. "It knows we fight to preserve something precious," she whispered. "It envies us. It wants the warmth of what we are. It doesn't hate us. It longs for us. That longing has become hunger. Morval felt her tremble, but he held her steady. The choir's resonance collapsed into fragmented breaths. Candles flickered out one by one. The chamber dimmed to shadow. A Vox alarm broke the stillness. Enemy assault forms detected. Halbrecht's voice cut sharply across the ship's network. Multiple spore clusters accelerating toward close-range breach. They are no longer observing. They are striking. Morval lifted Seraphine. Steadying her, she forced herself upright. She wiped her face once, the sorrow transforming into something harder. Resolve. "I can still guide the choir," she said. "Not for offense, but I can shield them from being hollowed as they project again." Morval looked at her. "You risk being taken." She met his gaze without flinching. "If we do, nothing. The frontier falls. If the frontier falls, humanity becomes a memory waiting to be forgotten. There is no safe path left, Morval. Only necessary ones." The word struck him, not cruelly, but truthfully. He nodded. They moved together, the way they had moved since the beginning. Two people bound not by destiny, but by choice, forged in the quiet places where despair tried to grow. The fleet braced as the first wave of spore pods streaked through the void, burning like meteors. Flak fire erupted, turning the darkness into storms of shimmering debris. The ship shook as bioplasmic strikes ricocheted off the shields. The void was no longer silent. It roared. But beneath the roar, a pulse, not sound, not thought, emotion. "We come to remember you." Seraphine staggered, but Morval caught her again. "It's watching us," she said. "Not our weapons, not our tactics, our hearts. It wants to know how we break." Morval spoke, his voice low but unshakably steady. "Then we will show it how we endure." He pressed the ship-wide Vox command rune. "All hands, prepare for boarding combat. Hold your lines. Hold your brothers and sisters beside you. And remember, we do not fight to live. We fight to remain ourselves." Across the fleet, warriors braced shields. Astartes locked bolters. Guardsmen recited quiet oaths. Pilgrims clutched relics and whispered prayers with trembling lips. The void filled with burning streaks as spore pods descended. The battle was no longer distant. It had come to their hulls. An Erebus watched, patient, hungering, learning. The first spore pod struck the hull of the Sanctus Veritas like muted thunder, the impact rolling through the ship as a low vibration rather than explosive force. The shields flickered, absorbing the kinetic shock, but static rippled through the lumen arrays, and the deck beneath Morval's boots thrummed like the heartbeat of something enormous pressing against the walls. Through the sanctified steel of the command deck, he could almost feel Erebus breathing. Reports came in over the Vox in clipped, composed tones. Breach at outer hull section Delta 3. Bioforms entering through tertiary hangar. Boarding drones disabled, but second wave incoming. Casualties reported among the 23rd deck guard, resistance ongoing. Each message delivered with discipline, but beneath the calm, Morval heard something raw. Not fear of death, Imperial soldiers were raised to greet death as duty, but a deeper dread, the fear of being unmade. He turned from the viewport and strode toward the lift shaft, Seraphine at his side. The choir chamber remained sealed behind them, its doors reinforced with warding sigils etched in gold and bone. Inside, the surviving psychers sat once more in formation, their minds exhausted, yet still bound to their duty. Seraphine had stayed only long enough to ensure they could maintain the psychic barrier she had woven into their consciousness. An anchor of identity to defend against the silent consumption of Erebus. Now her presence was needed elsewhere. The lift descended in a smooth plunge of cold air, lights flickering as the ship's power grid rerouted to defense patterns. Morval's hand rested on the hilt of his blade, not out of instinct, but intention. The weapon was not a relic of faith or legend. It was a tool of purpose, a reminder that no matter how vast the enemy, humanity met the void with will. Seraphine glanced at him, the dim glow of lumen strips reflecting across her eyes. You intend to stand at the breach yourself. There is no symbol more powerful than the one who refuses to yield, Morval replied. This crew must see that the soul can stand against hunger. Her gaze lingered on him a moment longer than necessary, not questioning, not pleading, simply understanding. She had always understood him, even in the silence where words could not reach. The lift doors opened to chaos held in formation. Steel corridors flickered with emergency lighting, casting the world in red tones like an endless battlefield caught in the moment before dawn. Naval infantry and stormtroopers moved in disciplined ranks, weapons trained, voices steady as they coordinated their response. The air carried the scent of oil, incense, and burning chitin. A guardsman passed by with his shoulder torn open, escorted by 2 comrades. Yet his face remained set in grim resolve. Even wounded, he saluted Morval. "Hold the line," Morval ordered. The soldier nodded once, then continued on. The echo of battle grew louder as they approached the breached hangar. A cold, wet clicking echoed down the corridors, the alien rhythm of limb-scraping carapace. The tyrannid organisms that had boarded were not like the common swarms known across the Imperium. Their forms were elongated, elegant in shape, their limbs flowing like sculpted ivory rather than jagged bone. Their movements were precise, not the wild frenzy of animal hunger, but the calculated step of entities following a memory of motion. They looked less like predators and more like mourners. Morval raised his blade. The corridor erupted into violence. The first creature lunged, its talons scything toward him with liquid grace. His sword met it with a ringing crack, sparks bursting into the dim air. He pivoted, driving the blade beneath its thorax, severing the filament sinews that held its structure. It shuddered once, then dissolved into slack mass, ichor steaming on the floor. Around him, the stormtroopers held formation with unwavering discipline. Bolter fire thundered in controlled bursts. Each impact tore clean holes in the chitinous bodies, yet the creatures did not scream. They simply fell, or crawled forward, even after their limbs had been rendered useless. No rage, no fear, no life as humans understood it. Seraphine moved behind the line, whispering grounding litanies, not prayers to summon strength, but words meant to remind the soldiers of themselves. Names, memories, faces of people they loved, moments they cherished, anchors against the theft waiting in the void. Yet for all their resolve, the battle did not end. The Tyranids came not in waves, but in a steady, suffocating stream, enough to press, enough to test, never enough to overwhelm, just like before. Erebus was watching, learning, measuring reactions, recording emotional resonance. The realization spread through the ranks without a word. It was not the bodies of the fallen that Erebus desired. It was the moment when courage faltered and despair entered. It was the shape of breaking. "Fall back to interior choke corridor," Morval commanded. "We control the field. We do not allow them to choose it." The line shifted in precise motion, retreating step by step without losing cohesion. Morval remained at the vanguard, blade flashing in clean, decisive arcs. Ichor splattered the deck in ribbons, but something was changing. The psychic air thickened, like oil poured over water. Seraphine felt it before the others did. Her breath caught, her steps faltered. She pressed a hand to her temple. No, not now, not here, she murmured. Morval steadied her instantly. Seraphine, look at me. She forced her gaze up, and what he saw there chilled him. Not fear, recognition. The hive mind, she whispered. It's pushing through the choir's barrier. It's searching for me. Morval tightened his grip on her arm. Can you resist? She nodded, but the movement was slow, strained. Yes, but the choir cannot withstand this much longer. One more surge, and... The deck vibrated with a distant hollow boom, not from weapons, from within, the choir chamber. Morval's chest tightened, not with panic, but with the certainty of cost. We hold the breach, he said to the officers. No retreat. Then he turned to Seraphine. We go to the choir. She shook, not from weakness, but from knowing what awaited there. They ran. The corridors blurred around them. The ship shook with boarding impact. Distant gunfire echoed like pulses of fate. The air felt thin, not from lack of oxygen, but from the slow draining of something far more vital. When they reached the choir chamber doors, the gold wards flickered. One of the choir members lay collapsed against the inside of the barrier, his eyes open and glassed with emptiness. Not dead, not alive, hollow. Seraphine's breath broke into a quiet, devastated sound. It's happening faster, she whispered. The hunger is accelerating. It has tasted enough of us to understand how to take all of us. Morval placed his hand on the sealed door. He did not knock. He did not hesitate. Open it, he said. Seraphine looked at him, truly looked, and understood what he was asking. To enter was to risk being devoured. To not enter was to surrender the galaxy. She lifted her hand. The wards parted. The doors opened. And the silence inside the chamber was deeper than death. The air inside the choir chamber was still, so still it felt wrong, as if silence itself had weight. Candles that once burned with steady, sacred flame now guttered in cold draughts that had no source. Incense smoke drifted without direction, curling upward and then halting mid-air before dissolving into nothing. The room had not been attacked physically. No claws, no acid burns, no ruptured hull breaches. And yet something had entered here, something vast enough to warp the very presence of sound. The surviving psychers knelt where they had collapsed during the last contact with Erebus. Some trembled. Others stared open-eyed at the far walls as though seeing worlds that did not exist. A few whispered fragments of remembered prayers, voices thin and brittle as dried reeds. But most were quiet. Too quiet. Morval moved among them with slow, measured steps. These were his people, his responsibility, not merely soldiers, but souls under his protection. He had seen death in many forms. He had delivered it with his own hands when necessity demanded. But this hollowing, was something more terrible than death. Death left echoes. This left nothing. Seraphine knelt beside the nearest psyker, a young acolyte whose delicate fingers still clutched her rosary with desperate strength. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Seraphine placed her hand over the young woman's, guiding her fingers gently. She's trying to remember how to pray, Seraphine whispered. The words are there, the ritual is there, but the meaning has been thinned. Morval crouched beside her. Can she be restored? Seraphine shook her head, but slowly, carefully, as if admitting the truth might break something inside her. The soul does not vanish, she murmured. It is stretched, diluted, like a voice carried too far across the wind. What was taken may not be gone. It may simply no longer be able to return. Morval closed his eyes. Erebus is not killing us. It is dissolving us. A rustle of robes drew his attention. Hivox Adept Kolhan had pushed himself upright, leaning heavily against a support pillar. Blood still dried at the edges of his mouth, and his eyes were sunken, but his will had not been broken. "My lord," he rasped, "we attempted to hold against its presence. We strengthened the resonance barriers. We recited identification mantras, but the more we resisted, the more it learned the shape of our resistance." Seraphine rose to her feet, steadying Kalhan with a touch to his shoulder. "It does not assault us with force. It touches identity, memory, intent. The more we think, the more it listens." Kalhan nodded. "It is trying to become us as it consumes us." Morval felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. We are fighting something that is learning in real time. Every thought we use to defend ourselves teaches it how to bypass that defense. A tremor rolled through the chamber, subtle but unmistakable, not physical, psychic. A pressure like a vast ocean current shifting direction, as though something unfathomable had turned its full attention toward them. Seraphine's breath hitched. "It is here. Not the fleet outside, not the organisms on the hull. The mind." Morval's hand went to his sword, though he knew steel meant nothing in this moment. Still, steel steadied him. A whisper filled the chamber, not spoken, not heard, remembered. "We have tasted your warmth." The air thickened, bending around the words as though the chamber itself inhaled. "We do not hunger for your flesh. We hunger for the memory of your laughter, the shape of your grief, the pulse of your hope." Seraphine flinched as if struck. The young acolyte beside her began to shake violently, her rosary clattering against the floor. Kalhan pressed his palm to his chest, gasping as breaths came shallow and fast. Morval stepped forward, not to attack, not to defend, but to declare presence. "You are an abomination," he said quietly, not shouted, stated. "You devour what cannot be measured or earned. You steal without understanding. You are hunger without identity." There was no anger in the answering voice, only something like sorrow. "We were whole once." Images flickered through the chamber, half-formed, broken by distance and alien memory. A world of luminous beings, the harmony of shared thought, then the shattering, warp storms, demonic intrusion, something ancient and terrible tearing identity apart, the remnants clinging to survival like drowning creatures gasping for air. We remember being more than hunger. Seraphine pressed her fist to her chest, tears forming though she did not sob. The choir felt the memory too. A ripple of pain passed through them, not inflicted, but shared. Morval's expression did not soften. "The galaxy is full of wounds," he said. "Pain does not grant permission to inflict it." The presence shuddered, a pulse of something close to grief. "We do not seek to harm. We seek to fill the void where memory once lived, to be whole again. You call it devouring. We call it returning." Seraphine stepped forward, voice raw. "What you take cannot restore you. What you take only empties the one who gave it." There was a long quiet. "We know." That acknowledgement was more terrible than denial. The presence dimmed, not withdrawing, but shifting. "We watched your memories of faith. Belief shapes identity. Identity shapes warmth. The choir mistress carries more warmth than any mind we have tasted." Seraphine froze. Morval's hand tightened around his sword hilt, knuckles white. The whisper became intimate, close, tender. "We will take her slowly." The psyker screamed, not in pain, but in fear. the fear of the moment before forgetting. Seraphine gasped as something cold brushed the edges of her awareness. Not invasive, but searching. Morval acted before thought existed. He stepped into her path and spoke, not in defiance, but in claim. "You will not have her." Silence answered. Not rejection, not threat, consideration. "You would offer yourself instead." Seraphine's eyes widened. "Morval, no." The presence loomed, not as shape, but as gravity. His soul is anchored, heavy, rooted in duty. Its memory will endure longer. It will feed us longer. Seraphine seized Morval's arm. "Do not speak, not even in refusal. Anything you say gives it more shape, more of you to take." He did not look at the presence. He looked at her. "You told me once," he murmured, "that the soul is not made of light alone. It is made of the shadows one chooses to carry." Her hands trembled. "I will not allow my shadow to be the one that ends you," she whispered. He stepped closer, lowering his forehead gently to hers. Just enough to share breath, not enough to break discipline. "You are not the shadow," he said. "You are the memory worth defending." The presence pressed again, not forcefully, patiently, as though waiting for the inevitable collapse of a barrier already weakening. Calhan's voice broke through the rising psychic pressure, hoarse but steady. "My lord, the choir cannot withstand another surge. If we remain here, we will all be taken." Morval closed his eyes. He understood. They had to sever contact, not retreat, not surrender, cut the connection. But to do that, someone would have to open themselves fully to the psychic field for a single moment, long enough to give Seraphine time to collapse the conduit, long enough to invite the hunger, long enough to be taken. Seraphine realized the same truth at the same moment he did. "No," she breathed, "not you." Morval did not speak. He did not need to, because the presence already knew. "We accept." Seraphine's cry broke. Not a scream, not a plea. Something more primal, more human. The sound of a heart refusing to lose the memory of itself. She reached for him. Morval reached back, but before their hands met, the ship shook with sudden, violent impact. Red lumen alarms flared. A voice cut through the chamber, one that did not belong here. "Admiral Halbrecht to Lord Celestark. The Hive Fleet is changing formation. Something massive is emerging behind their vanguard. A bio-titan form. No, larger. My Emperor." The vox crackled. Seraphine and Morval froze. Erebus was not finished learning. It had begun to become. The words from the vox still echoed, fractured and trembling with a fear no battlefield ever taught. Morval did not answer immediately. He felt the tremor moving through the ship's structure. Not explosion, not impact, but weight, as though something vast had cast its shadow across the Sanctis Veritas. Seraphine, still holding on to him, turned her gaze toward the far wall, as if she could see through it, through steel and void and distance. "It is not merely a hive ship," she whispered. "It is a memory of the thing it once was, given shape. It has taken from those worlds enough to shape itself into a reflection." Morval steadied her, guiding her to her feet, though her limbs shook beneath her. We return to the bridge. The choir remains behind the wards. They are to attempt no further projection unless commanded directly. If the hive mind pushes again, they hold only to themselves, nothing more. Calhan nodded, but his voice was thin. "We will hold who we still are, my lord." Morval clasped his forearm, not as commander, but as one soldier to another. The gesture held weight. Calhan bowed his head, and Morval turned, leading Seraphine back into the corridor. As they walked, The ship around them thrummed under the distant beat of colossal motion. Lumen strips flickered, returning to life when Seraphine passed beneath them, machines reacting to her presence as though recalling their purpose. The Sanctis Veritas had always been more than steel and sanctified circuitry. Old ships remembered, old ships chose. They reached the bridge, and the vast star map projection dominated the chamber. The world beyond had changed. The Tyranid fleet was no longer drifting. A shape, monstrous, luminous, with stolen psychic resonance, emerged behind the vanguard. It was larger than any hive organism recorded in imperial archives. Its form was layered, as if forged from the memories of 1,000 species that once knew how to love and grieve, and were now reduced to pale echoes inside this thing. Its carapace was not merely armor, it was cathedral architecture, ribbed and vaulted, illuminated by an inner radiance that did not shine so much as remember light. Veins of faint, ghostly luminescence pulsed across it, like neurons firing in the corpse of a god. And at its core, there was a hollow, a void, a hunger that had learned patience. Halbrecht stood rigid, eyes wide but not broken. We have designated the new form as entity designation, more ascendant. It appears to be a central synapse locus, but unlike any we have catalogued. It is not exerting dominion. It is inviting the fleet to listen. Morval exhaled slowly. It wants the fleet to mirror us, to move as we move, to think as we think. Seraphine nodded, her voice quiet but resolute. The choir's earlier resistance gave it more than awareness. It gave it familiarity. It knows what it feels like to be human, and it is trying to build that shape inside itself. Halbrecht's hand tightened around the railing. If it completes that process, it will not merely consume worlds, Morval said softly. It will replace them. His words hung in the air like a tolling bell. The comm systems flickered. A priority channel opened, local system broadcast. Morval recognized the encryption immediately. General Acastian Vor. His image formed in static fragments. His face was drawn, his hair disheveled, his uniform marked by scorch and strain. He had fled, but he had not escaped. Morval, Vor said, voice low and ragged, stripped of pride. I was wrong. The bridge did not move. No one spoke. Vor continued, breath catching. The worlds we retreated to. They died without battle, without resistance. Erebus did not need to touch them. The memories of the refugees carried enough of its presence to hollow entire planets. It spreads through remembrance, through grief, through fear. Seraphine's eyes closed with quiet horror. It does not need to conquer, Vor said. It only needs us to feel it. Morval stepped forward, not with anger, not with condemnation, just with the weight of inevitability. Then return, stand with us. Vor's gaze flickered, sorrow, shame, acceptance. I am bringing what forces remain. We will not reach you in time for this battle, but we will arrive to bury the dead, or carry the living to somewhere beyond memory, if any remain. The transmission ended. No triumph, no reconciliation, only shared consequence. Morval rested both hands on the hololithic projection. He did not tremble. This is where the line holds, he said. Not for glory, not for victory, for memory, for the right to know our own names. He turned to the comm officer. Open broadcast to the fleet, all channels. The officer obeyed. The Vox throne flared to life, carrying his voice into every corridor, every deck, every vessel. Morval did not raise his tone. He did not shout. A whisper can carry further than a scream when the soul listens. All hands, he said. This is not a war for survival. Survival is a hollow prize without the self that gives it shape. Our enemy would take not our lives, but the meaning of our lives. If we fall here, the galaxy will not mourn us, because there will be no one left who remembers how. The bridge was silent. The ship was silent. Even the alarms seemed to quiet to hear him. You have loved, Morval continued. You have suffered. You have hoped. You have feared. These things are not weaknesses. They are proof that we exist. They are the warmth Erebus hungers for, because it cannot create what we are. His hand tightened on the railing, not in strain, but in absolution. Hold the line, not for the Emperor, not for duty. Hold it for every memory that has ever mattered to you. Hold it for the shape of the person you chose to become. He drew his sword, not as a symbol, but as a promise. If we must fall, he said softly, then let us fall remembered. Seraphine stepped beside him. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her presence said, I remember you. Outside, the Moor ascendant pulsed, not with hunger, with anticipation. The battle that followed would not determine life or death. It would determine whether humanity would still know what those words meant. The Moor ascendant drifted forward, not with hunger or frenzy, but with dreadful composure, like a memory returning to a place it once belonged. Its vast silhouette eclipsed the fractured starlight, casting the Imperium fleet beneath a shadow that felt less like darkness and more like forgetting. The void itself seemed to dim around it, as though light tired in its presence, weary of trying to illuminate what wished to remain unseen. Across the command deck of the Sanctus Veritas, every officer and crewman stood in stillness, watching the hololithic projection as the entity drew nearer. The Bio-Titan form's surface rippled with faint motion, as though layers of carapace and membrane undulated like breath, inhaling and exhaling the dreams of 1,000 worlds. The spectral glow beneath its surface pulsed slowly, in rhythm with a heartbeat, not its own. Morval did not look away. He understood what had changed. Erebus was no longer learning. It had reached a conclusion. Hunger had shaped purpose. Seraphine's voice was quiet beside him, more fragile than before. The choir is holding, but they grow weaker. The void pressure is increasing. It is not attacking with force. It is pressing its presence into every mind within range, like a whisper asking to be remembered. Morval's jaw tightened. Maintain the barrier as long as possible. When it fails, it must fail slowly. Halbrecht turned from the hololith controls. Lord Kelestar, the fleet awaits firing orders. Morval stepped forward. Prepare an opening barrage with all ships. Focus fire on the Moor's central luminary ridge. Strike before it finishes anchoring its synaptic net. The order spread through the command deck like a breath after drowning. The void lit in a single blazing moment. Lances ignited in radiant arcs. Macro cannons thundered, shells streaking across millions of kilometers. Plasma beams cut white scars through the dark. Torpedoes rode contrails of flame. The opening salvos surged toward the Moor ascendant in a storm of fire bright enough to shame a newborn star. The shot struck. Light exploded across the surface of the Bio-Titan, and for an instant, warmth returned to the void. Then the light dimmed, and the Moor ascendant did not break. It did not even recoil. The impacts sank into its form and dispersed, not deflected, not absorbed with the strange fluidity seen before, but taken, transmuted into silent ripples of memory. Energy was not lost. It was simply integrated, as if the hive organism understood the shape of destruction and allowed it to become something else instead of resisting. The bridge did not fall to panic. This crew did not panic, but quiet terror moved in every breath, like a thin crack spreading through glass. Morval lowered his hand. We expected resistance. Halbrecht swallowed. What we did not expect was indifference. Movement stirred across the Moor Ascendant's body. Not claws, not weapons, mouths, thousands of them, unfurling like petals. Not to devour flesh, but to sing. No sound carried to human ears. The choir heard it. Seraphine gasped at a sharp, painful sound and fell against the railing. Morval caught her before she hit the deck. Her pupils had dilated wide, swallowing the colour of her eyes. "It is calling to them," she whispered, "to every soul that ever cried out for warmth in the cold. It is singing to the part of us that hates being alone." The choir reacted at once. A psychic shockwave pulsed outward, not by will, but by instinct. The barrier faltered. Flickers of pale light stuttered along the sigils. Kalhan's voice came through the vox link, hoarse and strained. "We cannot hold this tone for long. It is not a scream. It is a promise." Seraphine stood upright, though the effort stole breath from her. If the choir tries to counter that resonance, they will be taken. They must hold to themselves, nothing more. Morval nodded once, a gesture both command and acknowledgement. Halbrecht turned sharply. Secondary spore fronts incoming. Over 20 vectors. They are not targeting engines or weapons. They are targeting life support hubs. They intend to keep us alive. The bridge fell silent, not to spare their lives, to remember them. Morval felt a cold clarity settle into him. This fleet is no longer trying to win a battle. It is trying to shape what remains of us into something it understands. Seraphine placed her hand on his forearm, light, steady, not to restrain, but to remind. Then we must give it nothing to shape. The spore pods struck the hull again. This time they opened differently, not bursting into swarms, but unfolding like cocoons, releasing pale, wraith-like forms that drifted rather than crawled. Their limbs were long, their bodies thin, their faces, if they could be called faces, smooth and sorrowful, like statues sculpted from the memory of grief. They moved through the corridors soundlessly. The defenders did not scream. They fought. Morval led the charge down a companionway, blade in hand, Seraphine at his side, their escort flanking in tight formation. The air thrummed with distant gunfire and the soft, unnatural rustle of things that did not breathe. Morval struck the first of the pale forms, slicing cleanly, but the creature did not fall. It simply dissolved into a mist of pale echoes, reforming further down the corridor. Seraphine drew in a breath and exhaled a word. Not quite a prayer, not quite a command, something old. The creature hesitated. Its form trembled. Morval's strike this time severed it entirely. He understood. These were not bodies. They were memory given shape. They could only be destroyed by those who remembered themselves. "Hold your thoughts," Morval called to the squad. "Remember who you are. Speak your names aloud." One voice shook. "Carolus, son of Jalen." Another steadied. "Reaver, 91st Sanctus Guard." Seraphine spoke her name last, though softly. "Seraphine Vale, and I remember." The pale form shrank back, but the more ascendant stirred again. A new wave of psychic pressure flooded the ship, stronger than any before. The choir screamed, not in terror, but in the agony of holding on to themselves. Their voices cracked, not from strain, but from the pain of identity being stretched thin like gold beaten to transparency. Kalhan's voice broke through the vox link, ragged, raw. "My lord, we cannot hold. The choir is fracturing. We are losing. The memory of speech." Seraphine froze. It was beginning. The hollowing. Morval did not hesitate. He activated command channel. All hands. Fall back to Orison's crown defense layers. We are abandoning outer formation. The bastion itself must become the bulwark. Seraphine turned to him, breath unsteady. You intend to bring the fleet inside the fortress shield? Yes, he said. We cannot outfight it. We can only outlast it. We make the fortress a coffin of memory. Anything Erebus devours there, it must choke on. Seraphine closed her eyes, just once, then nodded. No victory, she whispered. Only the prevention of loss absolute. Morval met her gaze. There has never been another kind of victory worth fighting for. The fleet began to withdraw, engines burning white through the dimming void. Behind them, the Moor ascendant watched, not with malice, but with longing, as though it waited for them to look back. They did not. Morval lifted his sword once more, not for battle, but for remembrance. Orison's crown, he said quietly, as the bastion's shields began to flare in the void, will not fall quietly. The shadow of Erebus deepened. The war for the soul of the frontier was nearly over. What remained now was the cost. The bastion of Orison's crown appeared in the void like an ancient monument half forgotten by time. Its massive ringed battlements encircling a star whose light now flickered weakly, as though exhausted by the shadow pressing in around it. The fortress fields began to flare in layered halos, golden shields overlapping like vast stained glass barriers, refracting what remained of the dying starlight into fractured beams that cut across the dark. The fleet moved into its protective perimeter, ships maneuvering with slow, solemn precision, their engines burning like votive candles carried through a procession of mourning. Morval stood at the central command console atop the fortress's grand strategium. The floor beneath him thrummed with the strain of shield latticework engaging fully, an immense weight of power drawn through a network of psi-reactive cores, each one anchored by centuries of sanctified layering and prayer. It was said that the bastion's heart was a relic older than the Imperium itself, a fragment of a pre-Unity cathedral, once used to bind an angelic intelligence to human service. Morval had never believed such stories, but now he hoped they were true. Seraphine stood beside him, though her presence seemed thinner now, as though she were already half submerged beneath the surface of some invisible current. She had not collapsed, nor lost clarity, but there was a quiet to her that had not been there before, the quiet of someone already walking a path no one else could follow. Around them, officers relayed damage reports and tactical updates. Spore swarms continued to drift through the void beyond the shields, suspended just beyond engagement range. The Moor ascendant had not moved closer, not to attack, not to retreat. It hovered just outside the fortress's shield perimeter, vast and patient, as though waiting for a door to open. Morval knew it would not wait long. He watched the hollow cathedral shape pulse with slow, rhythmic light, and he felt, almost gently, the attempt to be felt. A presence pressing against the mind like a memory of warmth in winter, or the ache of a name nearly remembered. Not violent, not malicious, but inevitable. He said her name softly. Seraphine. She looked at him, and though her eyes were tired, they still held the fullness of recognition. I am here, she said, and the words carried 1,000 things that need not be spoken. We cannot hold this position indefinitely, Morval continued. The shields strain under the pressure of its presence alone. If it begins actively unraveling them through psychic resonance, it will not need to break the walls, Seraphine finished. It will enter through the thoughts of those who doubt. The choir cannot hold the barrier much longer. Silence settled between them, but it was not the hollow silence of Erebus. It was the silence two souls shared when they both see the same truth. Albrecht approached, his voice steady but solemn. Lord Kellerstach, the choir reports significant deterioration. Calhan states that maintaining identity cohesion is becoming subjective. They are losing the sense of themselves as individuals. Morval nodded slowly. And if they lose that anchor, they will be the first consumed, Seraphine said quietly. And once the first falls, the rest will follow like dust caught in a closing hand. Morval turned his gaze toward her fully now, not as commander, not as guardian of an empire's memory, but simply as a man who had lived long enough to understand the shape of grief before it arrived. You knew this moment would come. She did not look away. Yes. Another silence, but this one held weight. Seraphine, he said, voice low, what are you about to do? She stepped closer, the space between them narrowing to the distance of shared breath. Erebus is not a monster, she whispered. It is a wound, a hunger for what it once was. It does not understand identity because it lost its own. It takes to remember what remembering felt like. It wants to be whole. It wants what we have. Morval's voice was quiet. And you think you can give it what it wants without losing yourself. She closed her eyes, not in resignation, but in acknowledgement of the enormity of it. No, I cannot give it anything without consequence, but I can choose what it takes. I can choose how it remembers. If it must feed, then let what it feeds on be something that grants it understanding, not emptiness. Morval's breath stilled. And what understanding would you give it? She opened her eyes, and for the first time since the choir had first touched the presence of Erebus, there was no fear in them. Love, she said. He did not move, did not breathe, just felt the weight of that word, heavier than any blade, sharper than any war. Love is memory, Seraphine continued softly. Love is identity. Love is the truth that we live not to survive, but to be known. If Erebus consumes that instead of despair, if it learns that identity is not something to be stolen, but something that is shared, it will remember what it once was, Morval finished. She reached up, slowly, carefully, and set her palm against his cheek. The touch was warm, alive, unbearably human. He did not pull away. Someone must show it, she said, and I am the only one it has already begun to listen to. Morval's hand rose to cover hers, holding her touch in place, as though anchoring her to this moment, to him, to memory. If you do this, he said, voice roughened, you may not return. Her voice trembled, but not from fear. I know. And if you fall, he said, the galaxy may never know your name. She smiled, a small, quiet smile that held no triumph and no sorrow, only truth. Then remember it for me. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the decision was already made. Not approval, not permission, recognition. He released her hand slowly, letting the warmth linger for as long as it could. Then go, he said, and his voice did not break. But do not go alone. She stepped back, and the space between them was no longer something that separated. It was something that held what had been shared. She turned, cloak trailing behind her like the soft tail of a falling star, and walked toward the choir chamber once more. Morval watched her go. He did not call out. He did not break. Because this was not a moment of loss. It was a moment of choosing what would remain. Outside, the Moor ascendant pulsed, not in hunger, in anticipation, in yearning, as if something within it recognized that what it had sought across the void for so long was at last stepping forward to meet it. The shields of Orison's crown shuddered, but did not fail. Not yet. Seraphine crossed the threshold into the choir chamber. The doors sealed behind her. Morval let out the breath he had been holding, and the void outside held its breath with him. The doors sealed with a whisper of pressurized air, and the choir chamber dimmed into the quiet half-light of votive embers. The psychers, still capable of thought, lifted their eyes as Seraphine entered, but they did not speak. They could feel her presence the way a shoreline feels the tide, the approach of something inevitable and ancient and unbearably gentle. She walked to the center of the resonance dais, the place where she had once stood to call upon the Emperor's light, to bridge the void, to hold hope together when distance threatened to unravel it. Now she came here to do something far stranger, to give a dying galaxy the memory of being cherished. Kalhan knelt where he had collapsed earlier, his breaths thin and shallow. He raised his gaze to her as she approached, his pupils ringed with the pale shimmer of psychic strain. "Choir mistress, I can hold the anchor for you, for a moment, no longer." She knelt beside him and placed her hand over his heart. His breath steadied, not with strength, but with acceptance. "You will hold yourself," she said softly. "Nothing more. Do not follow me. Do not reach for me. The moment you try, Erebus will see the shape of your soul and take it. Stay within yourself. Stay small." A faint, wry smile ghosted across his cracked lips. Staying small is not something psychers are taught to do. It is the only thing that will save you now. He nodded once, slowly, then closed his eyes, withdrawing inward, his presence dimming to the faintest thread of consciousness. The others, exhausted and damaged and fragile, followed him into that same smallness, each retreating into the smallest memory of themselves that they could still hold. A name whispered, a face, a childhood moment, a warmth in winter, not a life, just a fragment, just enough. Seraphine rose. She did not retreat inward. She opened. Her breath deepened. Her pulse slowed. Her eyelids fluttered shut, and slowly, with the careful precision of someone touching a wounded animal, she let down the walls within her mind. Not all at once, layer by layer. She allowed Erebus to feel the surface of her awareness, the faint warmth, the memory of music sung not to command faith, but to cradle it, the gentle glow of caring for those who could not stand alone, the quiet devotion to life, not as a thing to be protected by war, but as something worth being gentle for. The hive mind felt her. A vast pressure filled the chamber, though nothing physically changed. The candles flickered without wind. The walls seemed to grow further away. The air shimmered like light refracted through deep water. And then it whispered, warm, not hunger, not longing, recognition. Seraphine drew in a breath, and her voice came gentle as snowfall. "You remember this?" The presence pulsed, not in agreement, but in ache. We remember losing it. Images surged, not into her mind, but around it. The luminous beings of that ancient world, the harmony they once held, the horror of the shattering, the desperate grasping for memory even as memory dissolved into instinct, the slow slide into hunger, not because they desired to harm, but because they could no longer distinguish the difference between knowing and consuming. Seraphine did not recoil. She stepped closer to the presence, not physically, but utterly. "You are not whole," she whispered. "You cannot regain what you lost by hollowing what remains of others, but you can remember how to feel." The presence trembled. A galaxy shuddered with it. "Show us." Seraphine inhaled once, slow, steady, final. She opened everything. The fear she had carried as a child, that the galaxy was too large and she was too small. The awe the first time she heard the choir sing in unison. The grief she had held for every soldier who died believing they were unseen. The love she had never spoken for Morval, not fire, not hunger, but the quiet certainty that he was the one person she trusted to look into her and see her whole. She did not hide any of it. She did not guard herself. She let Erebus feel, not devour, not claim, feel. The chamber filled with radiance, not light, but awareness. The psyche stirred, not in awakening, but in recognition of something greater than fear, something older than despair, something that had been nearly lost to the void. Connection. The more ascendant pulsed, not with hunger, with yearning. The void outside shimmered, stars flickering, nebulae warping, space trembling under the pressure of something ancient remembering itself. Morval saw it from the Bastion command deck, not with his eyes, but in the air, in the bones of the fortress, in the sudden warmth that pressed into the cold of the void like the first sunlight after winter. He turned toward the choir chamber doors. They glowed. The light was not bright. It was soft, human. He ran. The corridors blurred, soldiers parting without needing to be commanded. Some fell to their knees, not in worship, but in the shock of feeling something inside them that they had forgotten they still possessed. Hope. Morval reached the chamber doors just as they opened. Seraphine stood in the center of the room. She looked like herself, but her body shimmered with pale radiance, starlight shaped into the outline of a person. Her eyes were full, not burned out, not hollowed, not gone. Full. Morval took one step toward her. Seraphine. She smiled, not with triumph, not with sorrow, with peace. I remember you. He moved to reach her, but his hand passed through light. Her physical form was no longer there, only the pattern of her presence. The choir did not scream. They did not break. They did not hollow. They wept, softly, not because they had lost her, but because she had chosen to remain whole. Morval did not fall. He did not cry out. He did not collapse in despair. He bowed his head, not in mourning, in reverence. Outside, the more ascendant dimmed. Its glow softened. Its hunger eased. Not ended, but changed. It had remembered warmth. And for a fleeting moment, the galaxy was no longer falling into silence. Seraphine had not been devoured. She had not surrendered. She had become the memory that the hive mind could no longer steal. And Morval understood her final gift. She had given humanity time. Time to choose what it must become next. Morval remained standing before the choir chamber doors, long after the radiance had faded into memory. The fortress was quiet, too quiet, but not with the hollow stillness Erebus once imposed. It was a living quiet, the kind that follows the end of a hymn, where the echo lingers like a held breath. The psychers inside rested in exhaustion, not erasure. Their thoughts were their own. Their names had not been taken. Seraphine's gift had held. Yet she herself was gone, not destroyed, not devoured, transfigured into something the human tongue had no word for. Presence without body, voice without breath, memory made whole and untouching. A warmth left in the mind, like the echo of being held once, long ago. Morval placed his palm against the chamber door. It was warm, not physically, but in the way an old prayer is warm, even when spoken in a cold room. I remember, he whispered. He did not say her name. He could not yet. To speak it aloud would be to break something inside him still forming into shape. For now, remembrance was enough. It had to be. Halbrecht's voice came quietly across the Vox channel. Lord Kelestark, the Maw Ascendant is withdrawing. Morval opened his eyes slowly. He turned toward the observation deck as if awakening from a long winter sleep. The massive viewports revealed the void beyond, where the Hive Fleet now lingered with a stillness less absolute than before. The Maw pulsed once more, but the pulse no longer carried the oppressive pressure of hunger. It radiated something softened, something uncertain. Erebus was not healed, but it had been changed. The Maw Ascendant drifted backward, its vast silhouette receding into the cold dark, followed by the great bioships of Hive Fleet Erebus. Their retreat was not a rout. It was not fear. It was contemplation. Movement guided by something remembered, something fragile. The stars brightened as they left. Not by much, but enough that the bastion's stained glass windows caught real light again, not reflection. The star at the fortress's heart flickered, thin and wan, yet alive, alive enough to shine. Officers exhaled in collective stillness. No one cheered, no one saluted, no one claimed victory, because there was none. There was only what remained. Morval descended to the lower command tier. The crew did not speak to him, but they looked at him with something new. Not reverence, not awe, not fear. Acknowledgement. He crossed the corridor to the viewport that overlooked the central courtyard of Orison's crown, a hollow chamber open to starlight, where statues of saints and soldiers stood in eternal vigil. He walked to the railing and placed both hands upon it, gazing into the courtyard below. The wind moved there, artificial of course, vented through vast cathedral forges and atmospherics, seals, yet it sounded like real wind, real breath, real life. For the first time since Varax Delta Prime was found empty, Morval felt the weight in his chest shift, not lighten, rearrange. Footsteps approached behind him, heavy, decisive, familiar. "How far we have come from the arrogance of certainty," said General Acastian Vor. Morval did not turn immediately. Vor stepped to his side and looked out into the courtyard as well. His armor was damaged, bandaged beneath the plating, the mark of a man who had survived not through strategy, but through bearing the price of his mistakes. "You returned," Morval said. Vor nodded once. "You were right. Retreat was not preservation. It was surrender in slow form. I saw whole worlds fall while their people still drew breath." Morval exhaled through his nose. "Regret is not redemption." "No," Vor agreed. "But it is the only beginning I am worthy of now." A faint smile ghosted across Morval's features. "Then begin." Vor bowed his head, not in subservience, but in respect given freely and without expectation. They stood together in quiet, two men who had once walked in step, then in opposition, now beside one another again, not reconciled, but aligned by the cost of what had been lost. The vox chimed softly, Calhan's voice, thin but steady. The choir rests. Their memories are intact, their identities stable. They will survive, though they will never be the same. They had seen too much of what the universe could do to the soul. Morval closed his eyes again. "Guard them well." "As we guard ourselves," Calhan replied, and the channel closed. The star flickered again. Its light cast long shadows across the courtyard, shadows that stretched but did not fade. Morval watched the horizon of void beyond the fortress shields, where the last faint glimmer of Hive Fleet Erebus disappeared into the dark. The galaxy no longer felt like an expanse. It felt like a wound, but wounds can heal, slowly, painfully, imperfectly. Vor spoke again, voice low. "What will you tell High Command? The Administratum? The ecclesiarchy? They will demand explanation, victory, strategy, meaning. Morval shook his head. I will tell them nothing they can use. His voice was quiet, but resolute. I will tell them only what matters. And what is that? Vor asked, though he already knew. That in the darkest hour, the soul is not saved by doctrine or blade, Morval answered, but by the memory of being loved. Vor said nothing. There was nothing to add. The fortress lights dimmed as the auto candles cycled into nighttime illumination. Morval descended from the balcony and walked alone through the great corridor of Orison's crown. He passed statues carved by hands, centuries dead. He passed murals depicting battles long forgotten. He passed shrines where prayers once echoed like song. He reached his quarters, though he did not sleep. He stood in silence, lit only by the faint glow of the dying star beyond the viewport. His helm lay discarded on the table, his gauntlets beside it. He removed his cloak and set it down with care. And then, finally, he let himself speak. Only one word, only one name. Seraphine. It filled the chamber like a bell's toll, not grief, memory. He did not weep, he did not fall. He simply stood there, breathing, alive, himself. Outside, the star flickered again. The light was faint, but it remained. The era of Orison's crown was ending, but not forgotten.